we are not that far from a brand new Common Rider series coming out, and I have spent a little bit of time trying to collect my notes, collect my thoughts, and put together a script that I can make into a little bit of a video for it, because my last Common Rider video did pretty good, and I'm genuinely interested in the subject. And the more time I wrote on it, the more I felt like I'm not doing a very good job of capturing my emotions, even if I think I'm maybe enunciating my points more. I'm not really interested in that. I'm way more interested in getting across my feelings, even if they're kind of mangled in the process. So I guess I want to preface that this is a bit of a unique circumstance for me. I've been into Kamen Rider for about 3 or 4 years now. I got into it in 2019 when Zio was airing. Zio was an anniversary show. It was really built on having a bunch of returning characters, and because of that, I didn't watch it. I wasn't familiar with any of the returning concepts. It seemed like a bad idea at the time. I was very excited for the show that followed it, Zero One. Zero One I enjoyed. I was really into in the opening act, but I kind of fell off of it by the end, like a lot of people did. I really wasn't interested in Zero One's follow-up, Saber. The concepts didn't really speak to me, and the general look of it wasn't very appealing. So when Zero One ended, I really wasn't interested in Saber. When Zero One ended, I didn't really have much to look forward to, and I've still not actually seen more than a handful of episodes for Saber. I was very excited for Revice, which is what followed Saber, and I ended up kind of falling out of it as well. There's like 2 episodes of Revice I've still not seen. It's just because the show felt like it ran out of steam too early. I was kind of milquetoast on Geats when it got announced. I didn't like the design very much. I thought it looked kind of basic. It looked like something someone would build in like a template maker or something. But I've really grown to love the show. I think it's the best the series has been since like Build. This is like world-class stuff. It feels like the show is constantly reinventing itself. It's constantly pushing forward, and I think that's such an invigorating thing, considering both Revice and Zero One felt like they were spinning their wheels after like the 20th episode. I actually feel like Geats is one of the few Kamen Rider shows where it could probably go for probably another year, and I don't think they'd run out of ideas. I don't think they'd run out of concepts. I actually think maybe it's too hampered. There's not quite enough time for all the ideas they have in the show to kind of breathe and find their footing, which is kind of its biggest downside. I'd rather have a show that's struggling to get out all of its ideas than one that doesn't have a whole lot to begin with. From that perspective, I'm a little worried about Gotchard, and a lot of that is just because I think the general track record for Kamen Rider has not been exemplary lately. Like I said, Zio is okay, Zero One is okay. I haven't seen Saber, but most people seem to say it's okay. Revice is okay. None of them are bad, but of the last 5 shows, only the most recent one do I think is genuinely great. And that gives me a little bit of pause to get really invested in Gotchard, only for, January to roll around and find out that it's cut more from the cloth of Revice than Geats. Now that being said, regardless of where Gotchard goes, I think it's an amazing suit design. I was pretty instantly enthralled with this one when we first saw it. I think it got revealed in a poster that typically is how it's done, and it feels like the opposite of what happened with Revice. In Revice, the first time we saw it, I fell in love with the design instantly. I thought it looked really bold and really interesting. It looked like kind of like a perfect Kamen Rider design for me. But when we actually saw it in person, when we started to see actual clips of it, the color of the material wasn't quite as vibrant as I wanted it to be. On posters, it's sort of like this hot pink. It's very vibrant. It's very, It has a depth to it. But when you see it in the show, it's this really dull, ugly pink color. I'm pretty sure it's the same, like, plastic material they use for all the Barbie stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen, like, Barbie toys up close, but they have that sort of weird shimmer to them. And I think in that context, you know, that material is probably fine, but out in the sunlight where Kamen Rider is almost always shot and, you know, where all the action takes place, I think it kind of looks trash. It looks very dull and ugly. And it didn't help that that was the primary color for all the early forms of the show. On the other hand, while I like Gotchard's design in that poster, I think seeing it under proper lighting where it's going to be most of the time, it looks amazing. It's so reflective, and it is a good example of how being live action adds depth to Kamen Rider. If Gotchard was animated, the suit would be blue. It would probably look like it looks on the poster, but because it's a real material that they use, they chose a material that was very reflective, and it adds something hard to describe to looking at the suit. Every time I look at the suit, I'm kind of catching something else. The light catches on certain parts of the suit, and the light doesn't catch on other parts, and both of those things are kind of fascinating. Every shot I see it in, I'm starting to see different imagery. It's very alive. It's very complicated. And I think ultimately, the more time you spend with a Kamen Rider suit, the more you recognize that stuff. There were certainly little divots in stuff like Revice that I came to really dislike. I don't like how its jaw is kind of jutting out, like winging out. I kind of preferred it if they tried to make it look like a solid organic piece. Little things like that. I felt kind of similarly about Double. Double is split down the middle. One half is very shiny and vibrant, and the other half is this dark matte color. But I think they probably should have inverted it. I think the black should have been deeper and the bright green should have been the matte finish. I think that would have balanced a lot better. But there's also just a lot of positive ways. You look at, like, the texture of the eyes is a big one. And while I thought Geats looked kind of dull on the poster, in person, when you're seeing it riding around there, there's a lot of little bits and pieces that kind of catch you. It looks interesting from different angles. You start to notice little things, like how he has like a necklace of bolts that kind of make the, I think they're called tomoe, those like little curved things that you see in a lot of Japanese artistry. Really interesting stuff. I think Gotchard is going to be a suit that I'm just going to love to look at kind of forever. There's little parts of the suit design that I expect to not like so much. He kind of has these, like, it's hard to describe them. They're like fins coming off of the face. And then on the legs, the bottom armor kind of juts out. I typically prefer a Kamen Rider to be more even in the design. It makes a lot of sense to emphasize their legs because their finishing attacks are kicks. So you do see that sometimes. 01's a very good example where he has armor on his legs but not on his arms. But I think it just doesn't look very good. And I think I prefer it to be more evenly distributed. But it really doesn't bother me with Gotchard. And I feel like maybe a year ago it would have. I don't know what's changed that it hasn't. But every time I look at it, I see them, and for a second I expect to feel like grossed out. And then I just don't. I just don't feel anything about it. If anything, I find them a little charming. I think the fact that he has actual goggles that move up and down and kind of change his face structure is such a cool design element. I remember when Revice came out, I was hoping that the jaw would actually move. And I had this idea that, like, if the upper part of the jaw moved up, the mouth would kind of open, but also it would look like his eyes are narrowing. And I thought that would be a really cool effect that they didn't do. They didn't do anything really super interesting with Revice as a design, despite how unique it is. And that's always been sort of a problem with that show for me. That's the only real design we have for Gotchard, which is a very interesting change of pace. When you look at the last couple years, we've had, I think, every show since Zeo, every show after Zeo has had at least 3 to 4 common writers in the first 10 episodes. Now, I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention to the pre-release stuff for Saber, so I can't really speak to that one. I don't think we saw many of the writers in Revice until they were actually out. We kind of knew about them, but we didn't see them until they showed up in the proper episode. So it's still possible that Gotchard is going to have this sort of expansive cast, but I kind of hope it doesn't. When you look back at the last 20 years of Kamen Rider, a fair amount of them have had, a lot of them have had 3 or fewer writers. And I think that adds a more focus to the series, which has really benefited it. Being a writer kind of elevates your character. And I think a big problem with the Reiwa era of stuff, which is everything 0, 1, and after, is they're too unfocused, and because of that, the characters tend to be underdeveloped. I think a very good example of this is you look at Iki, the main character of Revice. I feel like he does not change or grow substantially over the course of his series. It feels like every time there would be a down moment that could maybe focus on him a little more, the show was focusing on a different Kamen Rider, or it was focusing on debuting a new form, and I found a lot of those fights didn't give him the opportunity to really shine. A lot of the upgrades he got felt almost convenient. It didn't really feel like he as a character was changing or growing, and that's such a shame because I thought he had a very strong opening in that show. And I think if there were simply fewer writers, he would have had more time. Just out of necessity, the show would have had to keep the show fresh and interesting. They would have had to create new conflicts specific to Iki. God damn. And those would kind of stand out a lot more. And he would have been more mature, and he would have been more interesting and more developed, and that's a shame. Gotchard's casting is, I want to say, we have listings for about 6 or 7 characters, some of which may not be main characters, and some of which are probably going to become writers. But for now, pre-release, the only writer we've seen is Gotchard himself. And I think that's smart. I think that kind of innately separates him, and it puts sort of a unique weight and responsibility on his shoulders. The premise of the show is Hotaro Ichinose, and I don't have his name pulled up here, so I'm sorry if I got it wrong, is a normal student in high school, which is already kind of unusual. Kamen Rider tends to focus on young adults in their 20s, who discovers that his high school has like a secret underground school for alchemists who are sort of hidden from society and do alchemy and stuff. He gets somehow involved in it. They are looking for cards that hold monsters, presumably like homunculi or like creatures created by alchemists or something, called kimmies, which feels like a phrase that's very easy to make dirty, and I hope you appreciate the restraint I am showcasing by not making them dirty in this video, because I can assure you it's a lot of effort. He gets the belt, he becomes Kamen Rider Gotchard, and he's going to work with them to hunt down the kimmies and collect them all. It's a very simple little setting. I'm a big fan of the collectathon stuff. I think that's usually fun. I think it's a lot of fun to have a character. I think it's fun to have a set roster of stuff to collect. One of my favorite Kamen Riders is Kamen Rider O's, and a big part of the reason I love O's is because of how it handles its sort of collectathon stuff. O's himself and the enemies use the same stuff to sort of power up. And they are fighting over it, and they actually kind of have to trade and swap sometimes, where he'll get in a fight with a character, and he'll steal one of their coins, but they'll steal 2 of he'll steal one of their coins and they'll steal two of his. And, well, now he can't use those powers anymore. And he has this ever fluctuating roster of abilities. He never gets them all, and none of them are ever supplanted. He just adjusts what he can do at a given time. And I think that's such a fresh and interesting way to handle it. And they've never really matched it. Even in the other Collectathon stuff, it feels like after a while the writers get bored of introducing the new abilities, and they kind of just introduce them. Build's a great example of this. There were simply too many to have any normal structure to it, and at a point, a character kind of just hands him a sheet of all the bottles and says, hey, here you go, have fun. And he ends up not using those very much because at that point, he's just got a better ability. I'm not complaining too much. His better ability looked way cooler than any of that stuff did. So, kind of a blessing in disguise. But I think it would be a lot of fun to actually watch week to week, see Gotchard's roster kind of expand and see him having to use powers in interesting ways and get them in new ways and actually, you know, kind of evolve. There are these little card things that you can actually buy, and as I understand it, they have little ratings on them, and in order for Gotchard to transform, the 2 cards have to equal 10. Otherwise, it doesn't seem to work right. He showed up in the Geats Summer movie, as most common writers have like a little cameo to set them up. And as I understand it, he kind of first appears as this big, ugly CG monster, and that got me kind of worried. In Revice, he had, you know, a bunch of alternate forms, but they didn't really do anything. They didn't really have powers. They just turned into a CG thing, and he fought as a CG thing, and I didn't find it very compelling. I think CG can be used to enhance a practical fight scene. I don't think it can be used to replace one, though. And I think that's a big flaw with Revice, especially in the early show. It definitely goes away as the show goes on, and I think when he gets some of those upgrades, his fights are pretty great, but the first act of the show is just really bogged down in sort of CG mush. And there was a part of me that was a little worried that we were going to find out that Gotchard is also going to be a lot of CG mush, which is really sad because Geats has had some absolutely amazing practical effects. Like, some of the camera trickery in Geats is insane. There's this one shot I just keep thinking of, and it's a split shot. It's split down the middle, and it's 2 common riders transforming before they fight. It's, you know, it's a pretty standard thing. But then the opposite cameras pull out and form one, like, seamlessly form a, like, above shot of the riders running at each other and fighting. It's insane. I've never seen anything like it, and it's 2 seconds of a show that airs on Sunday mornings for kids. It's crazy. I watched The Mandalorian, and they've never done anything half as interesting camera-wise in their fucking show. It's insane. I'm starting to think if the numbers on the cards don't come out to 10, that's what he turns into. He turns into an unstable monster, and it needs to equal 10 to have a stable kind of form, and that's how they'll do it. And I think that's way smarter, because that kind of opens you up to, okay, well, you can still be a CG monster, but now you're weakened. This is like a desperation thing. And I think that's more interesting narratively, and I think it's more interesting visually if, hey, when you do this, you're sacrificing something. When Revice turned into whatever, it meant, okay, the fight's over, and I can kind of stop paying attention. I kind of felt that way when I was a kid watching Power Rangers. When they got into the mech, I was like, okay, the fight's over. We're past the fun part. Now we're just going through the motions. That wasn't always the case, but that's how I felt. So I'm hoping that's the case. I haven't confirmed that, obviously. Until the show's out, I'm not going to know for sure. But if it is, I'd be pretty happy with that. Outside of that, though, I think the idea of Gotchard being this totally normal dude who is helping all these goofy magicians is really fun. And I was kind of thinking about this a little bit more. Is a lot of the comparisons or a lot of the expectations of Gotchard are kind of being based on the show Forze. Forze is the first Kamen Rider series to take place in high school, I believe. There might be something in I don't think anything in the Showa era did. I don't believe anything quite before him was in high school. There are other Kamen Riders in high school, but they usually don't spend a whole lot of time at school properly. Fourze is. Fourze is all school. And the cast of Fourze is pretty expansive. I think it has like 6 or 7 main characters, even before you start talking about like the side riders and the villains and stuff. And they're one of the best cast in the entire franchise, and that's saying a lot. Kamen Rider really kind of puts character above spectacle. That's what I really love about it. And somehow, not only are they very familiar archetypes, very familiar stereotypes for high school settings, I think they're some of the most unique and fun takes on those archetypes. It really feels sort of like an Archie kind of setup, where, you know, there's the big goofy jock, there's the head cheerleader who's the popular bitch, there's the weird goth lady, there's the weird criminal kid, you know, there's all these dweebs and stuff. And they're also mean, and they're also bitter. For a little while there in the 2010s, a lot of TV and stuff felt like it was very set in high school and seemed, I wouldn't say satirical necessarily, but it seemed very bitter, right? There seemed to be this ongoing narrative of how ugly and caustic high school was, and that can definitely be true, but like I think it shows like Archie or Riverdale or Glee, you know, stuff like that, and it always feels so ugly and mean. And usually the way they played with those archetypes is those archetypes are fabrications, right? Like you watch Glee and they have the big jockey football guy. He's only like that because his dad is living vicariously through him, and he's kind of abusive, right? You look at like The Breakfast Club, and the weird goth girl is only like that because no one will hang out with her, and once she has friends, she looks like a more normal person and stuff like that. I think the reason Fourze works so well is because those archetypes are genuine. The jock is a genuine athlete. He likes being an athlete. He likes being a football star. The goth girl likes weird horror stuff, but there's a little bit more to them than that. They're usually kind of aggressive and mean as a preemptive defensive measure. And when Fourze, the main character, shows up and he's not very judgmental and he's not very mean to them, when you look at other high school settings and stuff like that, you know, when the jockey guy goes and he instead becomes a musical guy, it feels like his character is completely pivoting. When you look at Fourze, it feels like the characters are actually growing. They're the same basic character, but they're moving forward a little bit, and they're able to kind of joke around and be a little more secure and sensitive, and it feels like Fourze is a positive presence in their lives. So when they kind of come to each other's aid and stuff, it feels earned, it feels genuine, it feels real. And I felt like a lot of that worked in the context of Fourze because it was these very familiar archetypes that were kind of exaggerated. And I didn't know if Gotchard could do that because Gotchard is in a magical setting and all the alchemy students have to be like new, and they're probably going to be more nuanced, and because they're trying to sell them as unique characters. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that's not true of them at all. I don't know if you've ever seen a wizard in literally anything. They're fucking weird. Like, that's kind of what defines them. So the idea of having, like, this alchemy school of these, like, shithead kids who are kind of all-powerful because they're doing magic, right? The rules don't apply to them, and they know it, and they're kind of mean, but they have to have this normal dude become Gotchard and clean up their messes is really fun and charming. It sounds like a fun sort of setup for the series. I think it's very interesting. There's something kind of humble about it, where his very existence is humiliating to the more prideful sort of wizard type people, because he's a normal person, but they have to rely on him. I think the idea of alchemists just constantly making problems that they have to pull in this heavy dude who's a normal guy to fix is a lot of fun. And I kind of hope Gotchard leans into that. Now, I'm a little hesitant. I don't know if anything in the marketing has kind of indicated that it's going to go that way. I feel a little like it's probably going to be more about the Kimmy stuff, and they're probably going to talk about, oh yeah, if you get all the Kimmys, you unlock a seal and a dragon comes out and destroys the world. But I think it should maybe be a little more character focused, a little tighter. I feel like Geats was so plot driven that the characters suffered a little bit. I like the cast of Geats quite a bit, but I remember like a month ago I was talking to my buddy and I was thinking, at the time I was genuinely thinking Geats might be the best Kamen Rider show, but I kind of sat there and thought about it, and I think I still like Build more because I think the cast of Build are just so much more likable. You could put Sento Kiryu in almost anything, and I would be immediately interested. I just think his character is so fun, and I think the whole cast is like that. Mizora, Banjo, Suichi, Grease, whose name I forget, the whole band of them, I think are just really interesting and really fun to watch, and whenever they show up in anything, I get pretty excited. I kind of wish they did more stuff with them than they do with kind of the weird, like, meme stuff with, like, yeah, we put Thouser and we put the game president guy in a show together, you know, like, yeah, okay, sure, but, like, I'd much rather see, like, I don't know, I was trying to think, there's got to be another Kamen Rider who farms, right? Like Grease and the other farming rider, there's got to be at least one. I bet Hibiki has a farming rider, that sounds like something they would do. I got on a weird tangent here. But I think that's the one place where Geats has suffered is, you know, its plot is kind of dense and they're kind of going at it through a good clip. But I think we don't necessarily have all the time with the individual characters that I would like. And I think Gotchard should go way in the other direction. And I think when you do that, people tend to say it's boring or slow. Drive did that, where the first half is mostly just one-off notes, but I find the cast in Drive also very charming and very fun, and I think those stories will stand the test of time, and I think it would be fun if it was just Gotchard having to help the alchemist fix their stuff, and the Kimmy stuff is kind of in the background and present. Maybe like all the alchemists have Kimmy cards and they just refuse to give them to anyone, and when they use them in their experiments they mess them up and Gotchard comes in and saves them. Or maybe it's like a trading thing where every time Gotchard does work someone is more likely to give him a card or something like that. I think that could be fun. And then in the second half of the show you can introduce and kind of build to a more direct villain, and now all these alchemists that have kind of begrudgingly worked with Gotchard kind of actually enjoy him and enjoy his presence and kind of accept him and now are willfully helping him. I think that would be a lot of fun. I guess I don't actually have a whole lot else to say. One of the only extra things I would say, there's some pictures going around of some of the other Kamen Riders that have the same shade of blue that Gotchard has. And after a couple of years, the paint kind of dulls from oxidization and turns bronze. And there's some theories that might happen to Gotchard. I think that would be awesome. I think that would be cool as hell, is if Gotchard is only blue in his show, and every time he shows up after this, he's bronze. That seems like it would be such an easy... That seems like it would be such a fun thing to do, and I feel like it would be such like a weird in-joke for people, where people who casual fans see him and maybe don't even get it, and they're like, why is he like that? And like, oh well, it's because of this stuff, you know, like it would be a fun inside joke thing. He shows up and he's bronze, and they can be like, what happened? I thought you were blue. And he was like, oh, they did like an experiment in my world and we don't have the color blue anymore. Like, we're trying to get it back. So, like, now there's no blue in his world. The sky is bronze. he shows up in like a 15-year anniversary, and they're like, "You're still blue?" Like, yeah, no, we're working on it. You know, stuff happens, stuff like that. I think that'd be a lot of fun. I'm worried about Gotchard, but I'm more worried about Gotchard because I feel like Geats is such a unique and great series that anything that follows it is going to have a hard time. That happened with Drive. Drive came out after Gaim, which is a lot of people's favorite. It's a great show, and Drive kind of gets a middling reputation because of having to follow that. Zio was kind of insulated because Zio's an anniversary thing. You really can't compare build to it on the same level because it's going for such a different vibe. But I have a feeling that whatever Gotchard does, it may be just difficult to really love as much as Geats. But if Kamen Rider has done anything, it has surprised me. If any show can follow up a show as good as Geats with something even better, or at least something as good in a different way, I feel like it's Kamen Rider. As I understand it, the showrunner for Gotchard did a lot of work on Saber, which I haven't seen, has done a lot of work on Ultraman, which I'm not really in the sphere of, but the general reception to his work has been positive. And even the people who I see talk about Saber usually say, oh, the first dozen or so episodes are not very good, but it really finds its place after that. And it looks like that's about when the Gotchard showrunner pulls in. So if that's how people feel about it, I'm cautiously optimistic. And if nothing else, it'll make a very pretty figure on the shelf. And maybe that's all Kamen Rider needs to be. No, it doesn't. It needs to be a lot more than that. But it could be. It could just be that, and that would be okay sometimes too. Whatever.